Fire illuminates the skyline, swallowing steel and glass in a merciless inferno. Millions in real estate centuries of corrupt political dynasties, all reduced to ash. It wasn't a revolution or a declared act of war. A city burned tonight simply because a ruthless predator found a bruise on the boy he claimed. If you look at the society pages of the Chicago Tribune, my life appears flawlessly curated. I am Rowan Bennett, a 24-year-old Omega, with a master's degree in architectural history, working a respectable quiet job at the Chicago Historical Society. More importantly to the press, I am the fiancé of Simon Prescott. Simon is the golden boy of Illinois politics, a charismatic progressive alpha currently serving as alderman of the 43rd Ward with his eyes set firmly on the state senate. To the public, he is a champion of the people, a man who kisses babies, shakes hands with union leaders and advocates for Omega rights. Behind the heavy mahogany doors of our Lakeshore Drive penthouse, however, Simon is a monster. The abuse didn't start with closed fists. It began with subtle isolations and chemical control. Under the guise of caring for my health, Simon used his connections at Rush University Medical Center to prescribe me an aggressive off-market cycle of synthetic suppressants. The drugs kept my scent permanently muted, making me a docile, perfect accessory. They also left me plagued by chronic migraines and an agonizing hollow ache in my joints. When I first complained, Simon gently grasped my jaw just a fraction too tight and whispered that political life required sacrifices. Then came the physical corrections, a grabbed wrist that left perfectly circular bruises, a shove against a wall when a reporter caught me off guard. He always apologized, always wept, and always blamed the immense pressure of his campaign. And I, trapped by a binding legal contract, masquerading as an engagement, and alienated from my family, learned to rely on heavy color-correcting concealer. Our collision course with devastation began on a freezing Tuesday evening in November. Simon was desperate. His campaign was hemorrhaging funds, and he needed the backing of Croft Industries to secure a controversial zoning permit in the Fulton Market District. To get it, he had to win over the CEO, Damian Croft. Damian Croft was not a politician. He was a force of nature widely regarded by the city's elite as an absolute villain, a billionaire real estate tycoon with alleged, though never proven, ties to the city's surviving underworld. He was notorious for his ruthlessness. Just a year prior, he had orchestrated a hostile takeover of a rival firm, bankrupting the CEO and driving the man out of the state simply because the rival had insulted Damian's late mother. Damian was an alpha who commanded a room not with a smile, but with a terrifying, suffocating gravity. Simon arranged a private dinner at a Linnea, booking the gallery room months in advance. He spent 3 hours dictating my appearance. "Wear the charcoal suit," Simon ordered, aggressively adjusting my tie. His scent a sharp, artificial mint spiked with anxiety. "Keep your eyes down. Speak only when spoken to. Croft is a traditionalist. He expects an Omega to be decorative. If you ruin this for me, Rowan, I swear to God." The threat hung in the air, thick and familiar. When we arrived at the restaurant, Damian Croft was already seated. The first thing that struck me was the sheer oppressive weight of his pheromones. Despite the heavy ventilation of the Michelin-starred restaurant, the air around him smelled of crushed embers, dark cedar, and an incoming storm. It was intoxicatingly pure, lacking the chemical undertones most city alphas carried. Damian was a striking, terrifying man. Broad-shouldered, clad in a bespoke, midnight blue suit that strained against his frame with dark, piercing eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Simon immediately launched into his pitch, his voice slick with practiced charm. He talked about tax incentives, community revitalization, and mutual benefits. Damian barely looked at him. Instead, those dark predator's eyes locked onto me. I kept my gaze fixed on the pristine white tablecloth, my hands folded tightly in my lap, praying my suppressants were holding. Your Omega is exceptionally quiet, Alderman. Damien interrupted his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated straight through the floorboards and into the soles of my shoes. Simon chuckled nervously. Rowan is naturally reserved, Mr. Croft. He understands the importance of our business. Does he? Damien leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The sudden proximity made my breath hitch. I risked a glance upward and immediately regretted it. Damien was staring at me with a terrifying intensity, his nostrils flaring slightly. He smells of fear and pharmaceuticals, Damien stated bluntly, entirely bypassing social etiquette. And beneath that, he smells like he's bleeding into his scent. Are you unwell, Rowan? It was the first time he had used my name. It sounded like a claim. Simon's hand shot under the table, his fingers digging brutally into my thigh. I masked the flinch, forcing a polite, empty smile. I'm perfectly well, Mr. Croft. Just the winter chill off Lake Michigan. Thank you for your concern. Damien didn't look convinced. He held my gaze for a long, agonizing moment before finally leaning back. He picked up his glass of bourbon, his eyes never leaving mine. I don't do business with men who can't properly tend to their own homes. Alderman, Damien said, coldly, directing the words at Simon, but keeping his eyes on me. Consider the proposal rejected. Enjoy your dinner. Damien stood, tossed $100 bill onto the table for the coat check, and walked out without another word. The silence he left behind was deafening. I didn't need to look at Simon to know that I was going to pay for this. The drive back to the penthouse was agonizingly silent. Simon gripped the steering wheel of his Audi so hard his knuckles were bone white. The moment the heavy oak door of our apartment clicked shut behind us, the illusion of the polished politician vanished. You stupid, worthless whore! Simon snarled, backhanding me across the face before I could even take off my coat. The force of the blow sent me sprawling into the marble entryway. My vision swam a high-pitched ringing, filling my ears. I gave you one instruction, Simon roared, advancing on me. Sit there and look pretty. And what do? You reek of panic. You humiliated me in front of the most powerful man in Chicago. I didn't do anything. Simon, please, I gasped, scrambling backward against the wall. He grabbed me by the lapels of the charcoal suit he had picked out, hauling me to my feet. His eyes were wild, his scent soured into something rotting and acidic. He dragged me into the kitchen, his fingers digging into my shoulders. He looked at you like you were a beaten dog. Simon spat, shaking me violently. You made me look weak. He shoved me hard against the massive marble kitchen island. My hip slammed into the stone, radiating a blinding spike of pain. But that wasn't the worst of it. Simon had been drinking heavily before we left, and his half-empty mug of scalding black tea still sat on the counter. My elbow clipped the ceramic. The boiling liquid splashed directly across my left collarbone and down my chest, soaking instantly into my shirt. I screamed, dropping to my knees as the agonizing heat blistered my skin. Simon didn't stop. He grabbed me by the throat, his thumb pressing dangerously hard into my windpipe, choking off my cries. You will fix this. Simon hissed his face, inches from mine, his spit hitting my cheek. You will smile at the autumn gala this Friday. You will look flawless. And if I lose this election, because of your pathetic display tonight, I will kill you. Do you understand me? He squeezed my throat until black spots danced in my vision, waiting for my frantic, choking nod before dropping me onto the hardwood floor like garbage. He stepped over my gasping body and walked to the master bedroom, locking the door. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of physical and psychological agony. The burn on my collarbone had blistered into a weeping, furious red welt. My neck was wrapped in a horrifying necklace of deep purple and yellow bruises, shaped perfectly like Simon's large hand. Every swallow felt like swallowing glass. Every breath pulled at the burned skin. By Friday evening, I was practically vibrating with pain. I spent 2 hours in front of the vanity mirror, applying layer after layer of heavy theatrical concealer to my throat. I chose a high-collared, long-sleeved, Saint Laurent silk shirt, buttoning it to the very top, praying the fabric wouldn't rub the blistered burn too harshly. The autumn gala was held at the Field Museum of Natural History, a sprawling, echoing masterpiece of marble and vaulted ceilings. It was the premier charity event of the season, packed with Chicago's elite hedge fund managers, socialites, and politicians. Simon played his part perfectly. He paraded me around the massive main hall, his hand resting heavily on the small of my back, a subtle reminder of his control. He laughed at jokes, shook hands, and accepted campaign donations with a gleaming, predatory smile. I felt like I was dying. The heat of the crowded room, combined with the heavy silk of my shirt pressing against my burn, was making me dizzy. The suppressants coursing through my veins were fighting a losing battle against the sheer trauma my body was enduring. My scent, usually suppressed to nothing, was beginning to leak a distressed sour vanilla and frantic cedar. "I need to use the restroom," I whispered to Simon, my voice completely hoarse. Simon tightened his grip on my waist, his nails biting into my hip. 5 minutes, he muttered through a fake smile. "Don't talk to anyone." I practically fled the main hall. I bypassed the crowded public restrooms near the entrance, seeking the quiet isolation of the dimly lit Ancient America's exhibit on the upper level. The corridors here were shadowy, lit only by the soft glow of glass display cases housing centuries-old artifacts. I leaned against a cool stone pillar in a deserted hallway, closing my eyes and letting out a shaky, rattling breath. My hands trembled as I carefully reached up, trying to loosen the top button of my shirt, just for a second, to relieve the agonizing friction on my burn. I thought I smelled blood. The voice came from the shadows, low and resonant. My eyes flew open. Stepping out from the darkness between 2 massive stone totems was Damien Croft. He was in a black tuxedo that seemed to absorb the dim light around him. His presence was immediately overwhelming, his alpha aura hitting me like a physical wall. But unlike the suffocating, toxic control of Simon's scent, Damien's scent of dark cedar and crushed embers was completely unleashed, sharp and primal. Panic seized my chest. I scrambled backward my heel, catching on the carpet, but before I could fall, Damien closed the distance between us with terrifying speed. He didn't grab me. He simply blocked my path, towering over me. His dark eyes swept over my face, taking in the pale sheen of sweat on my forehead, the trembling of my hands, and the shallow, painful way I was breathing. "Mr. Croft," I croaked out, trying to force my professional facade back into place. "I was just taking a moment." Damien stepped closer, invading my space. He leaned down his nose, brushing past my cheek. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He inhaled deeply right over the collar of my shirt. A low, dangerous growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound so pure and feral it made my Omega instincts scream in terrified submission. "Makeup," Damien murmured, his voice deadly quiet. "You've practically bathed in foundation. And yet beneath the chemical blockers and the expensive cologne, you smell like fear and burned flesh." "Please," I whispered, stepping back until my spine hit the cold stone of the pillar. "You don't understand. I have to go back to Simon." Damien's jaw clenched. Without a word, he reached out. His large, calloused hand was surprisingly gentle as he brushed my trembling fingers away from my throat. "No, don't," I pleaded, tears finally springing to my eyes as panic overtook me. If Simon saw my collar undone, he would kill me. Damien ignored me. With a flick of his fingers, he unfastened the top 2 buttons of my silk shirt and pulled the fabric aside. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever experienced. The dim light of the museum display illuminated the horrific canvas of my skin. The thick layer of makeup on my neck had begun to crack and sweat away, revealing the dark, violent bruises of Simon's fingers. Just below that, the raw, blistering red burn spanned across my collarbone, an angry, weeping wound. Damien stared at the marks. For a second, he didn't move. He didn't breathe. When he finally looked up, his eyes had completely changed. The cold, calculating billionaire was gone. Staring back at me was a predator that had just found a trespasser in its territory. His eyes were pitch black, his pupils blown wide. The pheromones rolling off him became so intensely protective and violently angry that the very air in the corridor felt heavy enough to crush bone. He reached up his thumb, hovering just a millimeter above the bruises on my throat, never actually touching the injured skin, as if he were afraid he would break me. When he spoke, his voice was a terrifyingly calm, dead whisper that promised absolute, catastrophic destruction. "Who did this to you? Who did this to you?" The words didn't come out as a question. They were a death sentence, delivered with the absolute, chilling certainty of an executioner reading a verdict. I couldn't speak. My vocal cords were paralyzed, my Omega instincts completely short-circuiting under the crushing weight of Damien's pheromones. I instinctively tried to pull the silk of my shirt, closed a pathetic attempt to hide my shame, but Damien's hand shot out, catching my wrist. His grip was entirely different from Simon's. It was immovable, forged from steel, yet it didn't bruise. It didn't hurt. It just held me anchored to the earth. I tripped. I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It was a kitchen accident. Please, Mr. Croft, let me go." Damien's dark eyes narrowed, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "A kitchen accident left a perfect imprint of a hand around your trachea. Do you think I am a fool, Rowan? Or do you think I am blind?" Before I could formulate another lie, the sharp, authoritative click of expensive leather shoes echoed down the marble corridor. The sour, minty stench of artificial alpha pheromones hit the back of my throat, making my stomach heave. "Rowan." Simon's voice was sharp, a whip cracking in the dim exhibit hall. "I told you 5 minutes. What are you—" Simon froze. He had just rounded the corner, coming face to face with the towering, broad-shouldered frame of Damien Croft. Then his eyes dropped. He saw Damien's hand wrapped gently around my wrist. He saw my unbuttoned shirt. He saw the vivid, horrific bruises and the weeping burn. For a fraction of a second, genuine terror flashed across Simon's face. But political arrogance is a fatal disease, and Simon quickly recovered, puffing out his chest and projecting his scent in a pathetic attempt to assert dominance. "Mr. Croft," Simon barked, marching forward. "Get your hands off my fiancée. You are crossing a very serious line." Damien didn't even turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on me, his thumb slowly, almost reverently stroking the frantic pulse at my wrist. Only when Simon was 3 feet away did Damien finally shift his gaze. The look he gave the alderman was one of absolute, terrifying apathy. It was the look a man gives a cockroach before crushing it under a boot. "Your fiancé?" Damien's voice was barely a whisper, yet it echoed through the cavernous hall. "Is that what you call the Omega you torture behind closed doors, Prescott?" Simon's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. "This is a private domestic matter. Rowan is bound to me by a Cook County Civil Union contract, notarized by Judge Harrison Barnes. He is my legal property until the marriage ceremony. Now step aside, or I will have Commissioner Philip Donahue down here in 5 minutes to arrest you for assault." A low, vibrating laugh rumbled from Damien's chest. It was a terrifying sound. "Judge Harrison Barnes," Damien repeated smoothly. "The same Judge Barnes who owes $7 million to a shadow shell company based in the Cayman Islands, a debt that I quietly purchased yesterday afternoon. And Commissioner Donahue, a man who receives a very generous, untraceable campaign contribution from my holding company every fiscal quarter." Simon's bravado shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that you own nothing, Prescott. Least of all him," Damien snarled. In a blur of motion too fast for my eyes to track, Damien lunged. He grabbed Simon by the throat of his tailored tuxedo, lifting the politician entirely off his feet and slamming him into the glass of the nearest display case. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed with a sickening crack. Simon gagged his legs, kicking uselessly in the air, his hands clawing at Damien's immovable arm. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic excuse for an alpha." Damien hissed, his fangs fully descended his eyes, bleeding into a solid demonic black. "If you ever look at him again, if you ever speak his name, if you so much as breathe the same air as him, I will not just kill you. I will dismantle your entire existence. I will ruin your family name, bankrupt your donors, and bury you in a hole so deep the devil himself won't hear you scream." Damien dropped him. Simon crumpled to the marble floor, gasping and choking, clutching his bruised throat. Without another glance at the ruined politician, Damien turned back to me. The murderous rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by a terrifying, possessive warmth. He stripped off his bespoke tuxedo jacket and draped it over my shoulders, hiding my ruined neck and the burn. The jacket was massive on me, completely enveloping me in the scent of dark cedar and safety. "Come with me," Damien commanded softly. It wasn't a request. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't look at Simon for permission. I pulled Damien's jacket tighter around myself and followed the villain out into the cold Chicago night. The world as I knew it ceased to exist the moment I stepped into Damien's armored Maybach. I was taken to a sprawling, heavily fortified estate in Lake Forest. For the first 2 weeks, I was confined to a massive sunlit suite, attended to by Dr. Alistair Reed, a private trauma surgeon on Damien's payroll. The synthetic suppressants were flushed from my system, causing days of agonizing withdrawals, fever dreams, and bone-deep aches. Through it all, Damien was a silent sentinel. He sat in the velvet armchair in the corner of my room, reading dossiers, working on his laptop, and simply grounding me with the heavy protective blanket of his pheromones. By the 3rd week, my mind began to clear. The burn on my chest was healing into a jagged pink scar, and the bruises on my neck had faded to a dull yellow. It was then that I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. I walked into Damien's sprawling mahogany study, wrapping a thick cashmere cardigan around my frame. He looked up from his desk, his dark eyes instantly softening as they swept over me. "Why?" I asked, my voice still slightly raspy. "Why did you do all of this for an Omega you barely knew?" Damien leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Sit down, Rowan." I took the seat across from him. He slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood of the desk. I opened it cautiously. Inside were dozens of architectural blueprints, historical zoning maps from my department, at the museum and financial ledgers. "Simon wasn't just abusing you because he was a sadistic bastard," Damien explained, his voice cold. "He was using your security clearance. He needed access to the historical underground infrastructure maps of the South Side. He and his backers, like Bradley Collins of Collins Real Estate, were buying up old, condemned residential zones. They were forging the geological surveys to bypass environmental regulations, planning to build cheap subsidized Omega housing directly on top of old industrial toxic waste dumps. My blood ran cold. The maps in front of me were the exact ones Simon had demanded I bring home for campaign research. If those buildings went up, thousands of lower-class Omegas and children would have been poisoned, Damien continued. He needed you compliant, doped up on suppressants, and terrified so you wouldn't ask questions. You weren't just his punching bag, Rowan. You were his key. Tears spilled over my lashes, dropping onto the blueprints. The sheer scale of Simon's evil was incomprehensible. "But why do you care?" I whispered. "The papers. They call you a monster. The king of the underworld." Damien stood up, walking around the desk to crouch in front of my chair. He reached out his large hands, gently cupping my face, wiping away my tears with his thumbs. "I am a monster, Rowan," Damien said softly, staring deeply into my eyes. "I deal in blood, blackmail, and ruin. But I have rules. I do not touch the innocent. And when I saw you sitting at that restaurant, smelling of fear and bleeding into your own scent, my alpha recognized exactly what you were. What am I breathed. "Mine." Damien stated his voice, a low, claiming rumble that sent a shiver of pure electricity down my spine. "And no one touches what is mine." That night, the sky above Chicago turned orange. I stood on the balcony of Damien's estate, wrapped in his arms, watching the distant glow on the horizon. It was a localized, terrifying inferno. Damien hadn't just reported Simon to the authorities. He had unleashed absolute scorched earth vengeance. Through a web of shell companies, Damien had purchased all the condemned warehouses and illegal properties owned by Simon and his backers. And then he had ordered his people to burn them all to the ground. Millions of dollars of corrupt real estate, decades of political bribes, and the physical evidence of the toxic dumping scheme all engulfed in flames. But he didn't stop at property. By morning, the Chicago Tribune was running the biggest scandal in a century. Damien had anonymously leaked the financial records to federal prosecutors in Washington, entirely bypassing the corrupt local cops. Judge Harrison Barnes was indicted for bribery. Bradley Collins was bankrupt and fleeing the country. And Simon Prescott, the golden boy of Illinois politics, was dragged out of his lakeshore penthouse in handcuffs by the FBI, screaming and sobbing as the press photographed his utter ruin. His political career, his wealth, and his freedom were reduced to ashes. "Is it over?" I whispered, leaning back into Damien's solid chest as the distant sirens wailed in the burning city. Damien pressed a kiss to the crown of my head, his arms tightening around my waist, pulling my back flush against him. His scent was overwhelmingly calm, a storm that had finally settled. "It's just beginning, little one," Damien murmured against my hair. "The city burns tonight to cleanse the rot. Tomorrow we build something new. For you." I closed my eyes, listening to the steady, powerful beat of the villain's heart beneath my ear. The world saw Damien Croft as a ruthless predator who burned a city to ashes for a petty vendetta. But as he held me safe in the dark, I knew the truth. He didn't burn the city to destroy it. He burned it to keep me warm. If you felt your heart racing during Rowan's terrifying escape and Damien's ruthless revenge, you won't want to miss our next dark romance story. Did Damien go too far? Or did Simon get exactly what he deserved? Let us know in the comments below. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow Omegaverse fans, and make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more intense, dramatic stories. See you in the next one.